Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. Running your own business for 20 years is a fantastic achievement. When you run your own business and COVID throws a huge spanner in the works, and you decide to grab that opportunity to emigrate to the United States, with 2 kids while heavily pregnant, people might call you nuts. On today's podcast, I chat with the co-founder of Eazy City and Eazy Study Abroad, Julia Lynes, who has done exactly that. Speaking from her home in Florida, Julia shares her personal and business story, including the challenge of running a business from a different continent and how she will be celebrating the 20-year milestone this year. Let's hear from Julia. Julia Lynes, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
You're so welcome. It's good to see you. One of these faces we'd see around Cork City, and as we were saying, besides COVID and everything, jeekers almighty, there's so many people that I haven't seen in such a long time. Faces you see regularly. And it's a big year for you, I believe, and we'll get into all of that. You're the co-founder of Eazy City and EZC Study Abroad.
It's a bit of a mouthful. We're going through a rebrand. I'll get to it. Yeah, there's a rebrand, maybe a renaming in the works. So there's a bit of a mouthful there with the different names.
It's funny, actually. The odd time you hear ads on the radio for particular companies, and they spell out the name, and I'm thinking, well, if you have to spell out the name,
it's problematic. Yeah,
there might be a small little bit of an issue there. I was going to start the podcast by asking you a question, and I don't want you to answer it, but I'm going to ask the question and then bring you back to it.
Okay.
And the question is, are you totally and utterly mad? So that's the question, and I'll get around to asking you again later at the appropriate moment. But when I got your bio and all that kind of stuff and read some of the recent changes, that was my first thought. Are you loopers?
Yeah.
But anyway, so Julia Lynes. We're going to join the dots for everyone, but the thing I like to do on the podcast is for the listener to get to know you. So, where did you come from?
So I'm from Cork originally. I'm from Glenmire, just outside the city. So that's where I was born and grew up all my life. And I went to school in Glenmire. I went to the Irish school down there, and then I went to UCC after that. So I stayed home, didn't go away for college. I did spend 1 year abroad in France, but as part of my UCC course. So I stayed home during school and college years as well.
Tell me about mum and dad. What do they do?
So mum and dad have their own business. They're actually visiting me right now. They're staying with me right now. They have their own business, still have their own business. No signs of retiring yet. And more power to them, I suppose. I shouldn't be giving out. I've gotten off getting them to try and retire. I've just realised they enjoy what they do. So they have an antiques business. So for many years, they had a really nice antique shop on McCurtain Street, which is now Cask. So most people would know it as Cask, the wine bar now. That used to be their shop. So I spent many weekends, Saturdays, growing up as a child in that shop, and then they do auctions. So in more recent years, then they closed the shop, and then they have an auction business which is outside the city now in Carrick-Doon. So they do regular auctions, antique auctions, and fine art and jewellery and stuff like that.
So you grew up in an entrepreneurial family as such, did you?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I suppose we didn't know it, or it wasn't kind of labelled that as we were growing up. It was just your parents, had their own business or worked for themselves, is what people would say. But now looking back in it, of course, I see that very much influenced what I started doing.
It's a different conversation in the household suddenly, isn't it? The
very
conversations around the kitchen table or whatever.
Very much. And I see it also with people who work for me down through the years, people who've come from small family business. There's something slightly different about their understanding of things very quickly in how small business works, let's say, and what needs to be done and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it definitely has a big influence.
And would you have felt that growing up, that there was a good year or a bad year, or things were flying, or there might have been a bit of pressure? So the family holiday might have been a bit more extravagant one year, and the next year we're all doing a bit of penny pinching. Would that have been the case a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, absolutely. And particularly, I think, in my parents' business, because, they're, luxury items, they're antiques. So you'll have times when people will have money to spend on that kind of stuff. And then during, more recessionary times, that's one of the first things that people are not going to be spending on. So definitely, absolutely. We often joke that, we remember growing up as children, either having sometimes, you might be having beans on toast for dinner, or you'd be in the Imperial Hotel for dinner. So it was kind of, it was very much like, spend it when you have it, enjoy it. And then, if you have to be a little bit tighter during other times, that's what happens. So, yeah, that's exactly how it was.
And you did a little bit of work in the business, did you?
I did, yeah. I mean, I would have done, I would have been there all the time anyway. I'm just by circumstance, I would have been hanging out there on the weekends. And then as I got a little bit older, I would have been the person in the shop on a Saturday. I would have looked after it for them. And then I did a little bit of work in their auction business as well. And even up into more recent years, I would have always been dipping in, and I'd go down and help them if I was free on a Saturday when they'd have an auction on, because I enjoyed it. It's something very different to my business. So I'd enjoy being involved and stuff like that. So yeah, very much grew up kind of part of it and working in it. And I think that probably actually gave me a really good understanding of customer service and building rapport and relationships with people without knowing that that's what it was. You were just doing it naturally. It was part of it, and you weren't being trained or taught it. It was just you were observing it and watching it. So in particular, I would often see my dad would go the extra mile for people, would say, oh, sure, I'm going to Dublin. I'll deliver that to you anyway. He wouldn't charge them, or he wouldn't do anything. He'd say, oh, I'm going up anyway. I'll bring that up along for you next week. Or he'd go out of his way to do something. And I think that's landed with me more than I realized. So that's kind of part of my approach a lot of the time now. I'll do a bit extra. And particularly where I'm operating now, some people are like, okay, but how much is that going to cost? And I'm like, well, there's no charge. That's fine. It's just part of it. Like, we're building a relationship. We're going to be working together. So, that's fine. So it goes a long way, I think. And maybe it's something that a lot of Irish people do. But I guess it's something that I definitely grew up with seeing,
Yeah, I think in the same way that if you grow up and mum and dad are musicians, they're in a band, and you're surrounded by that, suddenly you can play guitar at the age of 6 or whatever.
Yeah.
I think in exactly the same way, when you're surrounded by business, you're just soaking up all of that. You're hearing the phone conversations, you're hearing your mum or your dad dealing with customer complaint or a customer opportunity.
Yeah.
You get the stock in trade, you start listening to the success stories and people coming back to you, you learn what good service looks like and all that kind of thing. And you probably witness the opposite too, if there's someone annoyed about something.
Of course, yeah, you witness it all. And to be honest, it's at the time, like I say, you don't know, especially as a child or a young person, you don't have the labels for what that is. It's just natural. It's just there. It's just part of it, So I think that's great, because it's like with anything, a child is like a sponge, and they soak it all up, and it becomes part of the fabric of how you do things then going forward, quite naturally, without having to learn it.
Was there any bone in your body that said, I might follow them into the business?
Not really, no. I mean, running a business per se, I kind of thought about it here and there, but antiques and that kind of stuff is not my passion. No, not really. No, I think much to their disappointment.
And the young Julia, sitting in school, the teacher, for whatever reason, has totally and utterly lost your attention. Where do you go in your head?
Travel, definitely, kind of exploring, seeing the world, thinking about other, places. That was always in my mind. And then in terms of even like what I wanted to do back in the day, I wanted to be a lawyer. I think that was mostly because of some kind of legal dramas I would watch and the clothes that they would wear and all that power dressing and stuff. I found that very cool at the time. And then I seriously considered journalism. I went to Dublin to visit some of the colleges up there and look at the journalism programs. I seriously considered that. And then for whatever reason, it was kind of the draw was more towards languages. So I decided to kind of go down that route and study. I did European studies in UCC, so I studied languages.
Isn't it funny when you talk about being a lawyer or going into a newsroom? Because if you think about professions and you think about our exposure to different professions other than what our parents will do, maybe it comes from TV, and you do see the drama of those TV shows. You know, there were definitely lots of good films about those lawyer type situations. You can't handle the truth. The newsroom type shows where they're investigating something. Of course, you see the medical dramas as well, so you could understand. You don't see too many TV shows about an accountant balancing anyone's books or anything like that, you know. So maybe it's not a shocker the way we're attracted to particular professions if you actually think about it.
Quite possibly. Yeah, quite possibly. It's true, yeah.
So your career path then and your decisions to actually follow a particular path, you mentioned UCC.
Yeah, I went to UCC, and then during that time, I did a year abroad in France. So I had some experience with going abroad and studying abroad and having to find somewhere to live and all of that kind of stuff. And then I also then did an internship just towards just at the end of college, actually a graduate program. And we did an internship with a company called Taxback, and an Irish company. And I was working for them over in Germany on that program. And then at the end of that, it was around the same time that I had kind of started Eazy City at the same time. So it was more about, I did languages, and everybody said, for sure you go into teaching. And I was kind of thinking, but no, I wasn't really planning on being a teacher. But they were like, what else do you want to do with languages at that time? And I was like, I don't really know. I haven't figured that part out yet, but I'll get some kind of a job. I'll figure something out. So I was working part-time in my parents' business, and then started doing some translations for people who had just moved to Ireland, translating their CV, helping them out, started booking language courses for them with the local language schools, and started helping them to find accommodation. And that then started and basically grew into a business which became Eazy City.
And that was 2004, isn't that right?
That was 2004, yeah. I have a co-founder, and he's from Italy, and he had moved over to Ireland. And so we kind of saw that gap that people needed a little bit of help when they arrived first. And given that I was from Cork, I was able to kind of bring that element, and then he was able to speak to the clients themselves. I didn't speak Italian back then. And so, so we kind of just started helping people, and then it grew from there. And that was 20 years ago. I can't believe it's 20 years. That makes me feel really old as well, to think that my business was 20 years old. I remember thinking back when it was in its early days, God, imagine when we're like celebrating 20 years or something, and it just seems to have come around in the blink of an eye. So, so the early days were a lot of, helping people. People had just arrived. And I think there was a big draw for me to be able to communicate with people in another language. Anybody who knows me will say it's because you talk so much that you couldn't possibly stand not being able to communicate with somebody, so you had to go off and learn some languages. But it was a lot about helping people as well. For some reason I was like, gosh, they've come over and they don't know the language, they need to find a job, they only have this much money, I was totally invested, to the point where I was still living at home at the time, and I was dealing with one Italian couple that had moved over, and they had just finding a job, and I helped her to get a job, and she actually got a job in the English market in a butcher's, and because she almost zero English, and they gave her a shot, and her English, just came on in no time, dealing with all of the local customers. But they needed to find a place to live, and they were in a hostel, and I helped them to find a place through a landlord, an apartment at the time, but they were running out of money, and they needed to keep as much money for the deposit to pay the landlord and everything. So there was a space of about a week. So of course I brought them home to my parents' house, and I was just like, you'll stay here, you'll save a week on the hostel, and you'll have the money. And I had to convince my parents, and they were like, okay, we're these random people coming to stay in our house. But for me, I was very invested at the start. So I loved helping people. I loved being part of that journey and seeing them then go on and do great things and have a great experience, in Cork, and building a life for themselves. So that was very rewarding. I loved that.
And that was 2004 when the idea of Italians or French or Spanish coming to Cork to live was kind of a weird one, wasn't it? We didn't really have...
there had been some, working local companies and stuff like that, but there hadn't been there was a big influx starting around then, yeah.
It's funny, when you talk about people from overseas coming to Ireland, we used to always take foreign students during the summers.
Yeah.
When we were growing up, and it was a little bit of extra income for mum and dad at that time. So she takes students, they'd stay with us for maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And at the end of the summer, then we'd go on our summer holiday. And I used to love it because we'd have a French person for 2 weeks and then an Italian person for a few weeks. And they were always mixing in and mixing out. You go up to Cork Airport, you'd have your A4 page with a little passport photo of this person that was going to land. And it was the old days where you could stand on the platform outside and you'd see people coming off the planes and walking across the runway and through the door. Then there's a big gathering where, and of course we weren't the only ones, there'd be maybe 20 families up there waiting to collect their foreign person. And it was like, you were so excited hoping that it would be someone cool, a good friend that you'd have for a few weeks. And we got the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I don't mean ugly in terms of looks, but ugly situations. We had some right nut jobs, but some incredible experience as well. And it kind of changes you having those foreign voices and cultures and everything else, living with you, and it brightens everything up a little bit. So,
absolutely, I think it's great. We work with a lot of families in that way now as well. In Ireland and also in Spain, and they're just. I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity and a great experience for both. I think if everybody's in it for the right reasons, then it's wonderful. It works out so good, and we have so many students that still stay in touch with their host families years later and come back and visit and stuff like that. And host families who've been invited to weddings, in Spain, because from their student and stuff. So it's a really lovely experience. And it's lovely to hear it from the grown-up who was a child in that situation, that it was such a warm feeling to have different people coming in and having that culture in your home. It's lovely.
It was amazing, Julia. Like, I love music. Actually, just before we came on a bit earlier today, I booked Van Morrison tickets. He's coming to the Marquee at the end of May. And we had a student, I think I was just about 12. He landed with his cassette player. He had Supertramp, ELO, Lou Reed, Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton. I'm like, oh my God, this just blew my mind. So every single night, we're going to bed, the different cassettes were being played. Oh God, you're like a sponge at that. And he was cool as well. So if he was cool and he liked that music, then if I wanted to be cool, by hook or by crook, I was going to listen to those songs and like all of that music as well. And that set me on a path.
Those are great memories.
That was 2004, and we were rocking as a country. This was Celtic Tiger on speed. I think, don't they say that every 7 years there's a recession? We definitely skipped a 7. So we just kept on rocking and rocking and rocking. It's actually quite weird because at the very peak, I know people are saying now that housing and everything else has gone nuts. There's a house in our housing estate that was bought at that time for an amount of money, and the houses now still haven't even reached that amount yet.
Oh, wow.
I swear to God, it's we're good over 10 years since the crash, but it was bought, I'd say 2006 maybe, and what they paid for it at that time, the houses haven't even come up to that level yet. Now, they're not a million miles off it, but that they still haven't reached that level of craziness. So the time that we would have met, to the best of my knowledge, would have been when the crash happened. The local enterprise offices were doing a load of courses for starting your own business, your marketing, your PR. We were running a lot of them. I think Deirdre's Network for Business and everything. I think you were involved in that as well, Julia, weren't you?
Memory serves, yes. Network, yes, 100%.
In Network. And I think there was a spirit around that time that anyone who was in business, you were going to help each other because it was kind of a tough time. So that was probably a moment for you as well when we were all pushed to the pin of your collars. How did you manage through that time?
I mean, to be honest, strangely enough, there wasn't a massive effect for us, because you still had companies, multinationals that were still kind of recruiting, still doing a certain amount. And what had grown largely at that point for us was the kind of the accommodation side of the business. So that was kind of still a need, a necessity for people. And you still had a certain amount of students coming in each year, international students and stuff. So there wasn't a massive, like direct impact we didn't feel, but of course it was a time when for us it was the first time when there was any little bit of a slowdown, and so all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I've been running a business that's just been growing the whole time, and and now this is like, wow, we have to learn a whole different skill set here, and that's great. I mean, that's part of the business journey, and I think it's great in some ways. You learn so much more from those phases or periods. But I guess at the time, probably mostly because the whole COVID period now is more fresh in my mind, that feels like a much bigger phase for us. Obviously that changed the face of our business a lot more, but back then it didn't trickle down as directly to our business. There was a bit of a slowdown, but no major crash for us, let's say. And yeah, so we got through that part relatively unscathed.
Okay, so how did your business model evolve then from those earliest days?
So I guess, housing took off, that the accommodation for that kind of short, medium-term sector when people are relocating and that kind of thing. So we kind of put together packaged, flexible solutions around housing for them to make it easier. We worked with some of the local companies, the Vox Bros, Amazon, Apple, to help, relocate some of their people temporarily when they came in first and all of that kind of stuff before they would move on and find their own kind of long-term housing. And then, but in the background, we were always doing these kind of programs, these learning abroad programs. So we had groups of students coming in and they'd either do maybe language learning in the morning and they might do work experience in the afternoon. It might be something like retail or restaurant where they would actually get face-to-face customer time to practice the English that they were learning in the morning. Or there might be like other internship programs where they'd go into everything from accounts to finance and do an 8-week internship. And then we'd package it all up with different cultural activities and stuff like that. So that was all kind of going on in the background. But I guess, as we come further up then, closer to COVID, we were doing a lot more in that space. Housing is obviously a much more difficult business to be in now. The growth was not in that type of the business. It's very difficult to manage, accommodation and that kind of stuff anymore. So that's not really where we wanted to kind of grow. And so we turned our focus, really fully back to all of the other international programs and things that we were doing. And we were really making good strides when COVID hit. And we had just started to look at the US market. We had just kind of launched the US market from kind of 2017, 18 and into 19. And so then COVID kind of came and took the legs out of, international travel. Nobody was going anywhere. Mass exodus overnight. People just left keys in rooms. I'm gone, can't, need to get on a flight. And so that was like, major crisis management there for, a number of months, as with many other businesses experienced the same, and very similar. So it gave us a bit of, I suppose, when the crisis management period subsided, once and I'm glad we were in a place like Ireland, I have to say. I'm glad Ireland was, because in terms of government supports and things like that, I know everything wasn't perfect, but they got things out quickly and it allowed us to keep people in jobs and it allowed us to try and keep something going in the background so that we could take off again when things, got back to normal. I know of people, who were in other countries, and places like Italy, and they were, the wage subsidies or the things that were being provided were much smaller, and it was taking 10, 12 weeks before anything was available, and, even longer. So I'm, grateful that we were where we were, and Ireland is a pretty good place to do business. So that kind of, that after the crisis management period, I guess there was a little bit of a lull, and it was like, okay, things are under control in the way that we still have some form of a business. Yeah, we lost a lot of good people. We couldn't afford to keep everybody on and all of that kind of stuff. So that was a hard thing to go through. We had never had to go through anything like that before, but it also gave us a bit of step back thinking time and a little bit of freedom to explore things that we probably couldn't have done before so easily because we were so busy all the time, And so in one sense, that's the part I'm grateful for, if there's anything to be grateful for out of the whole pandemic,
Yeah, that pandemic was just someone unplugged everything.
Literally no international travel, no, and that's our business, so a certain amount you can do virtually. There were a certain amount of programs that we could continue virtually, but not the same level at all. So yeah, once we had kind of figured out what the landscape looked like kind of by the end of 2020, 2021 was a little bit of okay, this is a different pace. I haven't had this pace in many, many years where I can just slow down for a minute and explore. And that's the year that we made the move. So yeah, that was for us kind of a nicer year, I feel. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was a nicer year to be able to kind of, plan and explore. It was still difficult because you didn't know when it was going to end and you didn't know what we were really planning for. But there was a little bit of a lull there that we were able to catch our breath, let's say. And that was nice for a change.
And tell me, Eazy City, are we pronouncing that right, am I?
Eazy City study abroad. I mean, Eazy City over here. So Eazy City study abroad, yeah.
So what was the inspiration for that? How did that come about?
So I suppose because we were dealing a lot with European students coming into Ireland, mainly European students, some from Latin America as well and stuff like that, I was always interested in the American market. And my husband was always interested in the States as well, just as a place to kind of live and work and, try it out or whatever. So it had been on the horizon for a while. I opened a company in the US in 2017 and started doing some small bits of business, reaching out to universities there. There's a big field in the US where they send their college students, a bit like our Erasmus program, their college students are encouraged to do study abroad. And so they'll do a year or they'll do a short-term study abroad or they'll study at a college in Ireland or somewhere, or they'll do like a short-term trip with their professor and we would develop that trip together with them. So it might be something like, I'm doing a couple at the moment that are like, one is biomedical engineering, the other one is criminal justice studies. So I'm putting together the program with the faculty, and so it'll be everything packaged up when they arrive. So, everything from the logistics of the accommodation and their hotels and their meals and all that kind of stuff, and then site visits to, it could be pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, or in the case of criminal justice, I've come across with some great contacts recently, and like a local professor who'll speak to them from UCC, but he was previously a detective, so he's got some great experience and knowledge. He'll have a talk with them, just really plugging in local connections into the programs is something that I love. I'm really passionate about it. It's just, it makes it so unique for them, and they won't have that experience easily. So I love being able to create that. So yeah, so we kind of do that. So I was starting to do that in kind of 18, 19. At 19, we had our first students from the US come over, and it went swimmingly. It went great that summer. They were small numbers, but it was great just to have, feet on the ground and whatnot. We had a couple of students doing internship programs and others doing other ones. And then 2020 came, so that was that done for a little while. I had hired somebody in the US. We were really, making strides and whatever. So that was kind of disappointing. But then roll around 21, and it was kind of a case of, it was a very weird time. It was a really, really weird time because that Christmas had been very odd. We all came down with COVID after avoiding it for the whole entire year. In Christmas 2020, me and all the family came down with COVID, and it was just me and my husband and kid with the kids with my parents, because they live nearby. So we spent Christmas together, and so we couldn't really believe it that we'd gotten it then. And it was a strange time. My dad got quite sick with it and luckily pulled through. But, there was a moment where we were kind of thinking, gosh, are we going to be one of those families? He was in hospital, and it was like, are we going to be one of those families that, doesn't get to say goodbye to their loved one? Because we got a call from the doctor one day that wasn't great. And so, but luckily, touch wood and everything else, he pulled through. And I know not, everybody was that lucky. And so from there, we decided it was kind of now or never. And the situation with the US, I had gotten a visa, and the time was already running down because the visa was issued in summer of 2019, and it's a 5-year visa, so the time was already running down on it. And the travel restrictions were very strange at that time. You couldn't go from Ireland directly into the US. You had to go spend 14 days in another country that was deemed, lower COVID numbers or whatever, and that was either Mexico or Dubai, pretty much at that time. And we were afraid that they were going to even shut that off. And my husband said to me, Julia, he said, you're quite busy here right now. Like you don't, the company isn't taking up as much of your time as it used to. So why not now and give ourselves a bit of time to scope it out and see what happens? And I was like, yeah, but I'm not going to be able to do any business in the US when we go there because nobody's able to travel. And he was like, yeah, but it's not going to be like that forever. So let's go, let's see, and nothing to lose. Let's give it a try. So I was like, okay, all right. I wasn't fully convinced, but I was like, okay, why not? And so it all happened very quick when we decided to go to Dubai, because the other complication at the time was that I was pregnant with our third child, and I was about 16 weeks pregnant at the time. And so I kind of thought Mexico, Dubai, maybe the healthcare is a little bit better in Dubai if anything were to go wrong. I didn't really know. It was a very kind of just a toss a coin type of situation. So we went to Dubai and we stayed there for 14 days. And on the 15th day, we took a COVID test, and then we took a flight to the US. And yeah, we landed in the US, and then we kind of started our life there, building the business over here slowly but surely,
So that was my question. Are you totally and utterly mad, nuts, bonkers, taking that on with 2 kids and a baby on the way? And in terms of unplugging your Irish life, was that a decision? This is a new life here now in the States.
Not entirely, because everything was so up in the air that I really didn't know how it was going to work out. I didn't do anything. We didn't clear out our house. We didn't pack up our stuff. We thought that we might be back in a week, because we thought they could change the restrictions while we're in Dubai and they might close the borders completely and we'll have to come back. We didn't know if we would test negative for COVID or positive for COVID, all these things. So, and we were only just coming out of COVID ourselves. So we were like, waiting to test negative. And so it really didn't feel real, because of the whole situation in the world at the time. It all felt very surreal. It felt like we were going on some kind of a trip, some kind of an adventure, but really it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like I'm leaving my whole life behind, until there was a point when we got to Dublin Airport. My dad drove us to Dublin Airport, and it was around the time where, if I remember correctly, a couple of guys had gone to Tenerife on a holiday, and you weren't allowed to go on holidays at the time, it was only like business travel or work travel, and they said that they were engineers working on some project or something. They got caught coming back in or something like that. And so there were guards at Dublin Airport asking your reason for travel. And I remember he said, so what's your reason for travel? And I said, well, we're going to America I have a business. We're growing the business over there. So, and he said, oh, so you're emigrating? And I was like, yeah, well, yes, yeah. And that floored me. I nearly started crying on the spot, because I was not, prepared to say goodbye to my parents. I felt a lot of guilt also leaving, at that time, and everything was just so strange. So he was like, well, best of luck now with the business and everything. And I was there, thanks, so great, it felt weird. It felt mad. It felt strange. And, but we just kind of went with it, and I think if certain circumstances hadn't come together like that, we probably would never have done it, it would have been a much harder step for me to make. Also because, I wasn't doing it like everybody else did, emigrating in their 20s or leaving home in their 20s and, coming back then when you start having kids. I had started to have kids. I lived near my parents. They had grandchildren around the corner. And then I was taking everything away and so there was a certain amount of, heart-wrenching, moments came with that. But they were great, I have to say. They were very understanding and supportive of the move. So yeah, it didn't feel like a very final move, but just then gradually we started, when we got here, then bit by bit starting to get settled in and then starting to build back up the business here.
So you're there.
For now, yeah, for now. I still don't say that it's, forever. I think this has kind of opened my mind also to the idea of maybe living somewhere else in another few years. I don't know. At the time I was very, fixed where I was in Cork. Cork was home and it was home for the kids and everything like that. My husband is not from Cork. He's from Sardinia. So he had moved to Ireland. I don't think he ever planned to stay as long as he did, but then he met me, so he ended up staying longer. So I think he always had a little bit of a hunger to live somewhere else as well. And not, he wasn't drawn back to Sardinia or anything, but just live somewhere else. So it's been wonderful from that point of view, from the family's point of view. It's been like a whole adventure that we undertook together. And I really enjoyed that part of it, and getting to live in a new place, navigating all the things that come, with living in a new place, from tax to schooling to education to business to everything. I'm still learning, and I can't believe 3 years has passed. I cannot believe we're literally at our 3-year US anniversary this month.
Talk to me about work then and the European operation, or the Irish leg of it, which really is the hub, and the time differences and all that kind of thing. How are you running the business?
I suppose, again, given the way that everything has gone so remote and all that kind of stuff, it definitely made it easier to do that. It wasn't wildly different that you weren't there in your office and all over Blunkett Street every day and all that kind of stuff. So, people working from home and all that kind of stuff. So it made it easier. It was easy to do it then because there was almost nothing happening. The business was very quiet. There was very little happening in 21. And so it made it easier to do that and put certain things in place. And then obviously as things have gotten busier, it's been a little bit more challenging, but I've just had to get really, really smart and organized with schedules and stuff like that, because obviously you guys are in Ireland are 5 hours ahead of me normally, except for 2 weeks in March when there's a 4-hour difference because daylight savings takes place 2 weeks later here. So yeah, so I didn't think it was that much, but working in it is, because the minute I start work, everybody else is kind of coming back after lunch. So I've only got a small window of afternoon to catch people for meetings. And then my day continues here, obviously with the US side of things. So I generally start very early. That's kind of the only way around it. I start work very early, and that suits me because then I finish up a little bit earlier in the afternoon and I can be available then to spend time with the kids because they're still quite young. So I have a great team. I have to obviously say that. I have a great team and people who are flexible and willing to pitch in and help out. And we're flexible then as well. So everybody kind of is working in a situation that works for them. And I have great people on the ground in Ireland and now in Spain. Our operation in Spain is getting bigger now. So that's kind of exciting as well. So yeah, and then I come back as often as I can and I try to spend the summer back in Ireland and visiting our site in Spain as well and be on the ground more. So then, I get out of the baking oven of South Florida in the summer and get back to a nice, cool Ireland and put the children into Camp Oscuelga. We did that last summer and they loved it. So they didn't have a word of Irish going into it, but they went into summer camp Oscuelga in Upper Glanmire and they absolutely loved it. So hopefully we'll do that again this summer.
So the boots on the ground time, you are back in Ireland.
Yes.
And my understanding was the whole business model was bringing people into Ireland. And would that be predominantly Cork?
I guess, we have a lot coming into Dublin as well, and to a lesser degree we do some stuff in Waterford and Galway. I tend to be pretty biased, so whenever I'm putting programs together, if I can get their itinerary to shift down to Cork for more days, that's what I do. They want to see the main things that they want to see in Dublin, but then usually I'm like, okay, let's go down here and you can spend more days down here, or base them in Cork and get them to do their stuff in kind of Kerry and West Cork from Cork. So I try to do that, but it's all over really. And then so that's kind of all the students coming into Ireland, and then in Spain it's mainly Valencia, and to a lesser degree we do a little bit of stuff in Barcelona as well.
So you're bringing people into those cities as well, yeah?
Yeah, so from the US and then also from other countries. We have a lot of students coming in from Germany and France and Spain, but our US numbers are growing. This year is busy, so I'm very excited about that. It's just, still really trying to make our way into this market. There's a lot more to discover here and a lot more to do. So it's been largely just me, myself and I up to now. So doing this side of it, doing the kind of business development side of it over in the US.
Do you see it being a reciprocal thing that you could be bringing Irish people out to the States? Might it work that way, do you think?
I would love to. I would love to start doing some programs. I'm very interested actually in high school programs. So high school exchange and high school programs. So sending high school students, right now I deal mainly with college students, but sending high school students to Ireland and Irish students back over to the US. I'm also really interested in the area of sports. They're absolutely sports mad over here. And we're pretty, fairly into sports ourselves as a family. So that's kind of ramped up since we've been here. And so I'm very interested in some sports programs and stuff like that as well, and getting a bit more involved in that. So it's just, there's so much to explore. There's so much that you can do here. But we are still a relatively small company. So I'm trying to do it in a way that's sustainable and that creates some kind of balance, because I don't want to do it at any cost. You could grow exponentially over here quite easily, I'd say. But it's, I have a young family. I want balance in my life. And most of the people that work with us, we're of the same mindset. So we'll do it, but, we won't do it at any cost either. So there needs to be balance.
Yeah. And tell me, how's Donald Trump? He's a neighbour of yours, I believe.
I don't see him too much, thankfully. I don't bump into him at the local shop or anything like that. Yeah, that's wild. That whole situation is wild, and it's going to get even wilder now because obviously the year that we're in, And I have very little words on American politics because it just takes my breath away anytime I read anything about it, Are
you socialising over there? Are you making friends?
Oh, yeah. I have to say it's been so easy. And maybe that's because where we live is an area where a lot of people moved here during COVID. So a lot of people from New York and some from California moved to this area. And so you have a lot of people who are not from here. Actually, if you meet the area that I live in is called Boca Raton. And if you meet somebody who was born and raised in Boca Raton, it's quite rare. So I think because of that, people are very open to making friends, a lot of young families and stuff like that here. So very easily meeting people through the kids' school and sports and things like that. And I found people to be lovely. I've made some really, really good friends since we moved here, and genuine people who, you know, stepped in and looked after my kids when my waters broke early and my babysitter wasn't available, the one that I had set up, and all of that kind of stuff. And they really stepped up to the plate and helped us out, and it was great. So I have only good things to say about the people, I have to say.
What was the biggest challenge about being over there, Julia?
The biggest challenge is, probably is I'm further from home than I realized when I was moving here. You know, I just kind of thought, East Coast, 5-hour difference, hop on a plane, be home, whatever. It's a long enough journey, but that's probably different now having 3 young kids. You know, if you're on your own, that doesn't matter as much, but, there's so much planning that comes into. So probably, the distance is probably one of the biggest challenges. And then balancing that with a young family and trying to grow a business. That's what I mean. That's kind of, anybody who's doing that has to deal with that kind of stuff, regardless of where they are.
And having your own business for 20 years, congratulations. It's amazing. It's a big milestone. I know when I worked for other people, you start a job, it's brand new to you, lots of challenges, there's a learning curve. Then at a particular point in time, you start repeating yourself. You've exhausted everything that's to be had from that experience. And then you get itchy feet and you look for a new experience and a new experience. Now, I know the move to the States was a big change. So you found something new within your 20 years of having your own business. For people who have their own businesses, and I'm even thinking as well of your mum and your dad, how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we keep ourselves fresh and going all of the time? When a lot of the time, you are falling into a cycle, What do you think? What would you say to people who are punching in the same thing in their own businesses for a long, long time? We're exactly the same. Fusion is we're 24 years this year. So yeah, next year will be 25.
Congrats, that's great. That's great. Yeah, no, it's a big achievement. I think, for me, there did come a point where I was doing a lot of the operations as the business was growing and stuff like that. I was doing a lot of the operations, and yeah, it did get a little bit, I'm not going to say tedious. I like operations, but some of it was getting kind of tedious and some of it was getting too much. And I was lucky that we were in the phase of growth, so I could add somebody to the team to take a certain amount of that off, so that I could focus on other things in the business that kind of interested me. But reinventing yourself, I do think there's a lot to be said for doing a job that you enjoy, and it doesn't have to be a wild passion that you must. I know it's important to bring passion to a job, right? But I think sometimes nowadays people, especially young people, they're sold this kind of dream of you must find your purpose. You must find your purpose in life, follow your dream and find your purpose. And there's a lot to be said. That's a privilege in some, for a lot of people, they don't have the privilege to go and find their purpose and find their, their dream job or their dream thing. And sometimes I think it's disconcerting because I work with a lot of college students. So you see they have this look in their eye that I must find what I'm good at. I must find my passion. I must find my dream. And you kind of feel like saying, you know what, actually the crux of it is you just need to do a job that you enjoy and, that you can be good at and have a good life alongside it and enjoy yourself. It doesn't have to be this, you're changing the world. There's a lot of people that are doing really good jobs and they're really good at them and really enjoy them. And that's also great, So I think that, sometimes we search too much for something different or something extra and we don't always need it, And for me personally, I've always loved the people stuff. I love working with my team. I love being involved in, if I can be involved in any way in mentoring or developing them or, seeing them grow. That piece has always motivated me. So I always, when I feel myself getting a bit, bored of the operations or stuff that I'm doing, I kind of try to veer back and get more involved in that stuff because that drives me. And I found a massive renewed passion since I've been over here working with the US college students that are, a different kind of a student body again. And they just seeing how much they benefit from getting out of the US and studying abroad. I don't think I fully comprehended it until I was here and based here, how insular It is, and how isolated they are really from the rest of the world. And they need to get out. They absolutely need to get out. And the benefit of that and how it just broadens their mind is incredible. And that brings huge advantages back to their local communities, the way that they engage when they come back, all of that kind of stuff. It has a very big impact. So I have a renewed passion. So it's still kind of relatively the same work that I do, but I'm kind of dealing with different people now in this market. And that's given me a refreshed kind of a look for it. So, that's kind of what's worked for me.
Because you have to find it in yourself somewhere, don't you?
You do, I think. Yeah, you do. And sometimes I do feel sorry a little bit for young people that are coming up nowadays, because there's a lot sold online about, go off and find your purpose and travel the world and find your dreams and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's a lot of pressure, like it's okay if you love crunching numbers, or if you love doing this thing or that thing, or even if you don't love it, but you're good at it, you can earn a living at it, and you can have a good life outside of work. Isn't that what it should be about too,
Well, I don't think the world would work if everyone was doing that.
Well, right, exactly, yeah.
Who's going to bring your letter, and who's going to work in the shopping centre? Who's going to produce the food? Who's going to do all of those things?
Yeah. And I do think I've come across more people since COVID and all of that kind of stuff, where people really reevaluated their life and their lifestyles and what was for them. And I've come across a number of people who either had their own businesses or had very high pressure jobs and left them for whatever circumstance they, and then decided to go into a very standard, whatever you want to describe it, a very normal kind of 9 to 5 low responsibility job, and they're loving life, they've just got a totally different lease on life now. So it doesn't, I think some people think, especially young people, think that there's a trajectory of growth and you must keep going up and getting to this point. And life isn't like that. It goes up, it goes down, it goes around, so you can end up in a totally different place for a while, and that might be just one chapter, and then you're somewhere else in another phase of your life, and I think if it's a good way to look at it, because we don't get too stuck on what the journey must look like.
Because there's pressure to being an entrepreneur. And I think with your mum and dad, they obviously shared it. And in your case as well, you're sharing that. Would you hate to be doing it by yourself?
It's a good question. Depends on the day. It depends on the day, Generally, my co-founder and I, we get on very well. We get on very well now. That wasn't always the case. We used to spark off each other a lot in the past. He's got a very different approach to me, and but we did a lot of kind of mentoring with different consultants who helped us to kind of communicate better and that kind of thing. So it works. But for the most part, I would say no. I'm very happy to be doing it with a co-founder. I think that really helps. I'm not entirely sure how anybody works with their spouse. I couldn't do that route, and I would find that very difficult. I saw it growing up, and I've seen other people do it, and I personally, that doesn't work for me. But having a co-founder is great, because absolutely, there's really, there's somebody else in the business who carries the same kind of responsibility as you, and only they can understand that. No matter how many other great team members you have, it's not the same. They don't carry the same level of responsibility. They can kind of resign in the morning and go off and do whatever they want, but you don't really have that luxury with a business. You have responsibilities to other people and that kind of stuff. So you have to, you always carry that weight. So it is, I don't know any other way. That's the other thing. This is the only business I've ever run, and I've always run it with a co-founder. So I don't know any different.
I've always been the same as well. I've always been in business with someone, and I think it's nice. I wouldn't like to be doing that myself, and to any entrepreneurs out there who are shouldering all of it themselves. Fair play to you.
Hats off. Hats off, because it can be lonely. It can absolutely be lonely. Hats off. I mean, it's not always easy doing it with a business partner, but I think, hats off to people who do it on their own, because, like I say, I don't have that experience, and I think that would be extremely, extremely lonely. But that's where things like, network and all of those things come into play as well. I found those big supports as well. And for me personally, just kind of growing in as a business person and learning, I find, plugging into any kind of networks like that is great, because huge support.
Yeah, and in a way, Julia, hats off to us as well, for being entrepreneurs, because business comes with a lot of pressure. That COVID thing happened, you're like, oh my God almighty, are we going to be wiped out here? That sick feeling in the pit of your stomach. Everything you built, your livelihood, you think is just going to disappear. And that recession that we spoke about at the beginning of our conversation, it comes with pressure. And I just wonder, and even back to your mum and dad, I think we end up learning how to live with it. It's just a natural state. The pressure and the stress, that's just part of being an entrepreneur. And I just wonder, at some level, is it taking it out of us at times too? a level that's different to rocking up to your job and just punching in time and going home and being able to leave it behind you. It must take it out of you some way. But there's all the positives and everything else. Of course, there are the freedom and all that kind of thing.
I mean, I know what you're saying. I do know, I know a lot of people, who work in different jobs for different companies, and it's, a lot of them carry massive responsibility, and they're not off when they clock off. They're getting phone calls at night time from their boss, or they're getting emails that they have to check and stuff like that. So I think it's quite different nowadays to, a standard job where you finished at a certain time and you left. There's a lot of jobs that are not like that nowadays. And so those people carry a lot of responsibility as well, 100%. I see it with friends, I see it with my own husband, stuff like that. But I don't know, because I've never done that. My career has all been, working for myself, really. So I can't compare, but there is definitely a certain amount that gets taken out of you when you're an entrepreneur and when you face certain challenges that kind of deplete you a little bit. So I think, it's hugely important as an entrepreneur to kind of have some time carved out where you're really just allowing time for recharge, because it can be, you can get kind of a bit drained or a bit, weary from it. And then you start to question, do I want to be doing this anymore? Or when you go into a recession or you're in that kind of a situation, inevitably your identity is very much tied up with your business. No matter how much I like to say that, I do lots of other things and I'm not Eazy City is not my whole life, but, it is a huge part of it. And it just inevitably, it just becomes part of who you are. It's really tied up into the identity of who you are. So when you're faced with that being just wiped out in an instance, in the likes, in the situation of COVID for us, for example, it was quite shocking. It was like, wow, okay, I've done this for like 15, 16 years. Who even am I without this? As in, okay, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I do other stuff, but I had no idea what would I even do, So it's definitely a different feeling, I think when you're an entrepreneur and you run your own business, it is a different feeling for sure.
So is it who you were?
I think I was kind of almost okay for a minute with the idea of everything just being, because if you ever think about doing something else, you have to work out in your mind, how is that going to work? How is that going to work for Eazy City if I wanted to go off and do something else? Or would I have to leave Eazy City? Or would I have to sell? Or would I have to do whatever? But when you're, faced with something like COVID, it's nearly all taken away. It's kind of like, well, the choice is taken away from me. And, maybe this is, but actually, I felt very attached to it. So I was glad that we were able to kind of keep it going and revive it post-COVID. So I think inevitably it's a lot of who I am, absolutely.
Yeah, and with Fusion, I'm exactly the same. I think it is kind of becomes you in a weird sort of a way. People say, someday you might sell it. And I'm like, no, it's kind of who I am. This is it.
And I wonder, because I see it with my own parents, and I see it. I mean, my dad particularly, he's really still very passionate about it, and still, really gets excited when he gets some, a call about some good stuff, or a nice house contents or something like that. He's very excited about it. So I look at that and I kind of go, wow, okay, am I going to be still like that, or do I want to, plan some kind of an exit at some point? And especially the 20 years has me thinking about that more, because I'm like, is this going to be what I do for my entire career, or will I have a different chapter where I'll do something else? Right now, I'm loving what we're doing, and I'm very excited about what's to come. And, we're doing this brand refresh, and there's a lot to come this year. We're going to do some celebrations. We're big into celebrations. I've always been big into celebrating the milestones. So I'll plan a party for the summer. I'll send you an invite. We'll do some kind of a party, definitely some kind of a celebration when I'm back in Cork to mark the 20 years and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. Will it go on forever? I don't know. Will I just retire at some point? Or you don't really think about that when you're setting out, you're building a business, and you're so busy, and then you look up and it's 20 years. You're like, whoa, where did the time go?
I'm not sure if you've ever listened to the podcast, but Esther Perel.
I'm obsessed with Esther Perel. I love her.
Isn't she amazing?
Unbelievable. Did you listen to her? I know she has the work one. I've only listened to a few of those about like working or business partners or colleagues or something. She had one, but then the relationship one, she had like some episodes during COVID lockdown where people were in major relationship crises and they were stuck in, houses. She had people from Italy and everything. Oh, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I love her podcast.
Yeah. So the one I listened to this week is with Ira Glass, who is the guy who's produced This American Life.
Oh, yes.
Which is a great podcast, but he's at it nearly 30 years.
Wow.
Obviously, it was a radio show that morphed into it was a conversation between them, but at the heart of it, that's why I was really interested about doing something for a long, long time. And I think he was starting to question himself that should he set himself free from that cycle and everything else. But then he loved it. He loved it, you know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. But this is this lovely thing called life, Julia.
Yeah.
What's happiness to you?
Happiness. I mean, I'm somebody who likes balance. So when I feel like things are in balance in my life, I feel happy. So when I have, when I feel engaged and excited and busy and fulfilled with my work, but it's not all consuming and taking over, that I have enough time to spend with my family and enjoy my family time and enjoy a bit of travel and just, enjoy time with the kids and spend time to do stuff at home. When that's in balance, I'm very calm and I'm happy. When it's not in balance, I tend not to be happy about things, and but usually I work to bring it back into balance. My go-to is bake. If I bake some healthy snacks for the kids, if work is all consuming and I feel like I haven't been paying as enough attention to the home life, I'll just bake some healthy snacks for the kids, and then I feel like I'm winning again. I'm back on track, and that's brought things back into balance, and I feel fine then for another few days.
And you're obviously on the Win Happy podcast. So what does winning look like for you?
Winning for me, honestly, is having the privilege to be able to work with people and choose who I work with and who I do business with. And that's a big privilege, because when you're starting out, you don't always have that. But as you grow your business, as you learn lessons and things like that, you get to a point, even, financially, where the business is more stable, you get to kind of be a bit more picky about who you do business with, and choosing to work with people that I enjoy working with, that we have a similar approach or even a different approach, but we can vibe, and, it's enjoyable, because so much of your daily work is, working, doing business with people. I actually just got off a call earlier with the university, and, it was great. We just, we clicked, and it was like, yeah, I'd love to do business with these people. It's going to be fun putting programs together for them. And so that, I think, is winning happy, when you get to that point where you can kind of be a little bit more choosy and enjoy the people that you're doing business with, and enjoy that work and your team around you and that kind of stuff. That's winning happy to me. If it wasn't like that, I don't think I'd be doing it, to be honest.
And it's great to be clear about that, isn't it? And to realize that's what you want. You can do a lot of winning, and not a lot of happiness can go with it.
Right. There's a lot of cost. There's a lot of cost to winning, in certain situations. And I think you learn that over time. You end up giving too much of your time to something, or, for whatever reasons, it doesn't feel good, and you start to recognize that. And I think once you're in the position to be able to kind of say, well, no, I'm actually going to say no to that piece, and I'm going to do this piece because it works better for, I know it's going to be better for us, and I know it's going to be more enjoyable. We have to enjoy it. I spent many years with my head down, furiously just growing the business, and it was very consuming. And now I can say that while it's very busy right now and there's a lot going on, I'm enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it, and that's very important, because God, we know life is so short, and we spend so much of our time at work. And I love my work, and I can get very consumed by it. I have that kind of personality, so it needs to be positive, it needs to be joyful and enjoyable and fun, and not everything can be like that, but for the most part, it needs to be predominantly that. Otherwise, you need to be doing something else.
It's clear that it is that for you, and that it energizes you and everything else. I've one last question for you, and it's about Julia. What's your superpower? What's that thing that you bring to the party?
It's a good question. My superpower. I would say that I can take on a lot, which is maybe not always a great thing, but I can balance a fair amount. I can juggle a fair amount, and that's been helpful when growing a business. Probably not the best superpower. I'll probably think of something really good after we end this conversation, and I'll message you saying, no, I want that. I wanted to say this instead. So, I think I have a good capacity to see the bigger picture and to piece together things when dealing with people. So relationships with people. So I can easily step back and go, no, you know what, it's going to be better if we do it this way, because long term, that's what this is going to look like. So taking more of a step back view, a helicopter view, for want of a better term, I kind of tend to do that a lot. So I see where we are and I don't get too stuck down into the detail of where we are right now without stepping back out regularly and keeping a look at the bigger picture. And I think that helps guide the business as well, you know.
Julia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and congratulations again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Lovely to chat. I haven't done a chat like that in a while, so it was really enjoyable. Thanks so much for having me. And congrats on the podcast. It's great. I love it.
Thank you so much. And for the listener, it's a chilly day in Cork today, and Julia is wearing her bright green T-shirt in Florida.
It's my company T-shirt. I'm wearing I'm rocking the logo.
I'm jealous. Is the weather nice?
It is beautiful. It's perfect. It's about 25 degrees, 24 degrees. It's lovely. It's really, really wonderful. My parents are here, like I said, and they're going back this weekend, and they're already looking up the weather forecast and dreading it. So yeah, it's a great time of year to visit.
I hate you right now.
Look, open invitation. If you're Seven-Tier to want to come over, spare room, you're more than welcome. We live in a beautiful part of the country.
Thank you so much.
You might even go take a visit up the road to visit Donald. Why not?
Give him my regards. Bye, Julia.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Cheers. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.